I never expected my father to attend my promotion ceremony. What surprised me even more was how little it hurt when he refused. By then, I was 36 years old. Old enough to understand that some people don't change. Old enough to stop chasing approval that was never coming. Still, a small part of me had hoped. Not because the promotion was flashy. It wasn't. There were no television cameras, no red carpets, no politicians shaking hands for photographs. It was simply the culmination of 15 years of service, years spent working quietly, carrying responsibilities most people would never hear about and couldn't fully understand even if they did. The promotion represented countless sacrifices, missed holidays, sleepless nights, assignments that took me away from home for months at a time, the kind of work where success meant nobody noticed anything had happened. I thought maybe my parents would appreciate that. I was wrong. When I called them, my mother sounded distracted before I even finished explaining. "A promotion ceremony?" she repeated. Before I could answer, my father grabbed the phone. "A ceremony for what?" I explained. There was a pause, then he laughed. Not a friendly laugh, not a proud laugh. The kind of laugh designed to make someone feel small. "We're not wasting our time on your pathetic little promotion ceremony." The line went silent. For several seconds, I simply stared at the kitchen wall. The strange thing about disappointment is that eventually it becomes familiar. The first time someone breaks your heart, it hurts. The 100th time, it feels expected. I set the phone down and went back to making dinner. The ceremony happened 3 days. Later, I attended alone. Everyone else seemed to have family. There, parents, spouses, children, people, cheering from the audience. My seat section remained empty. Noticed it. Of course I noticed it. But I had learned how to carry loneliness with dignity. The ceremony was brief. A few speeches, a few handshakes, new badge, a new title. Years of effort condensed into 20 minutes. My colleagues congratulated me. Afterward, we took photos, we shook hands. Then everyone went home to celebrate with their families, drove back to an empty apartment. Oddly enough, that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was knowing my family would never even ask how it went, and they didn't. Weeks passed, then months, then years. Life moved. Forward, my responsibilities increased. The projects became larger. The stakes became higher. I worked with agencies, departments, and officials whose names occasionally appeared on national news broadcasts. I traveled constantly. I sat in meetings where billion-dollar decisions were made. Yet whenever I spoke to my parents, the conversations never changed. Mother asked about the weather, my father asked when I planned to get a real management job, as if my career were some temporary phase. Eventually, I stopped trying to explain. It was easier, less exhausting. If they weren't interested after all these years, nothing I said would change that. So I focused on my work, focused on building a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval. And slowly, without realizing it, I became successful, not rich, not famous, but respected, trusted, important in ways that mattered. Then one ordinary Sunday changed everything. Ironically, it happened because of a newspaper. I hadn't even known the photograph existed. A journalist covering a policy conference had taken a picture outside the Pentagon. Several officials were walking toward an entrance. I happened to be one of them. I wasn't front and center. I wasn't giving a speech. I was simply carrying a briefing folder. Behind me stood 2 security officers assigned to our delegation. That was all. To me, it was just another workday. To my family, it looked like a completely different reality. The phone rang before noon. My mother's name appeared on the screen. The moment I answered, I knew something was different. Her voice sounded nervous, urgent. "We need to talk," I frowned. "About what?" "Family meeting tomorrow," I nearly laughed. "Family meeting? We hadn't had one in years. What happened?" "Just come." Then she hung up. No explanation. No details. Nothing. The next afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. The moment I walked through the door, I knew something strange was happening. Younger brother was there, my aunt, 2 cousins, even relatives, who rarely attended birthdays had somehow appeared. The newspaper sat on the coffee table, folded open to the photograph. Suddenly, everything made sense. The room buzzed with curiosity. Questions started immediately. What exactly do you do? Who were those people? How often do you travel? Why were you at the Pentagon? Who do you report to? The questions came nonstop. For years, nobody had cared. Now everyone wanted answers. I sat quietly and watched. It felt almost surreal, like watching strangers discuss someone else's life. The most fascinating part wasn't what they asked. It was the realization spreading across their faces. They had spent years assuming they knew me. Now they were discovering they didn't know me at all. Then my phone vibrated. An operations coordinator. I glanced at the screen, excused myself, and answered. Room instantly fell silent. Yes. A pause. No. I can be available within 30 minutes. Another pause. Send the briefing. Package through the secure channel. The silence behind me deepened. I ended the call, turned. Around, every face was staring. My father blinked. What was that? A work issue. Nothing more, nothing less. But the atmosphere had changed. The room suddenly felt smaller. My cousin leaned forward. You have to leave? Possibly. Nobody knew what to say. Then my phone rang again. This time the caller's name was visible. My younger brother saw it first. His eyes widened. He recognized the position, not the person. The position. The call lasted less than a minute, professional routine, nothing unusual. But when I ended it, the room felt completely different, because authority had entered the conversation, not through bragging, not through explanations, not through status symbols, simply through reality. For years my family had treated my career like a hobby. Now they were witnessing undeniable evidence that other institutions viewed it very differently. Nobody laughed anymore, nobody made jokes, nobody offered sarcastic comments. The silence became almost uncomfortable. Finally, my mother spoke. I don't think we realized. Her voice trailed off. She couldn't finish. She didn't need to. Knew the rest. We didn't realize who you became. The truth, however, was much simpler. They never tried to find out. For years they had looked at me and seen only the version they had already decided existed, not the person standing in front of them. A few minutes later, I stood to leave. My work couldn't wait. Neither could life. As I reached the front door, my father followed. For the first time in my entire adult life, he looked uncertain, almost nervous. His hands rested awkwardly in his pockets. Finally, he cleared his throat. Suppose you've done pretty well for yourself. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of years of dismissal. No admission he had been wrong. Just that sentence. Small. Careful, incomplete. Yet I knew it was probably the closest thing to praise he had ever given me. Years earlier, I would have treasured those words. I would have replayed them for weeks, maybe months. But standing there, something unexpected happened. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not victory, nothing. Because somewhere along the way, I had stopped needing them. I smiled politely. I've done fine, my father nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I walked outside. The evening air felt cool against my face. My phone buzzed again. Work waiting. Responsibilities waiting. People counting on me. I glanced back through the living room window. Family remained seated around the coffee table. Still, discussing the photograph, still, trying to understand the person they had spent decades overlooking. For the first time, I wasn't sad about it, because their recognition had finally arrived, but by then, it no longer held any power. The greatest achievement of my life wasn't the promotion, it wasn't the title, it wasn't the newspaper, photograph. It wasn't the respect of powerful people. It was learning that my worth had never depended on whether my family could see it, and once I learned that, I was finally free.